In this lesson, we'll create and style a few employee cards. Each employee card will consist of the employee's name, their initials, and their job title. And this is going to introduce us to a whole bunch of helper components from Material UI. So let's begin by adding a whole bunch of imports up top. Once again, I'm going to keep them alphabetical, and we'll begin with an import of avatar from @MUI/material/avatar. An avatar is essentially a circular logo, and typically this is where you might inject something like a user profile image on a website. But for us, we're going to use an avatar to store the user's initials on the eventual card that we create. Afterwards, after box, I'm also going to import card from @MUI/material/card. And then inside our card component, which we will eventually render, we can actually have smaller components that are each responsible for a section or a fragment of that larger card. So for example, there are two components that are available within Material UI. One is called card header, which deals with the card header, the big text up top, and then card content, which is the primary content of the card. And I'm going to import both of those components, and we'll see how they work in just a minute. So right here, I'm importing card header, and that's going to come from @MUI/material card header. And then below that, I'm going to import card content from @MUI/material card content. In fact, C comes before H, so this should actually be above for alphabetical organizational reasons. And you don't need to keep things alphabetical. That's just my personal preference, especially when we're importing a bunch of related components from the same library. So we have everything we need. So the next step is to render a whole bunch of cards, and I'm going to render them within a larger box. Remember, a box within Material UI is basically a div. So I will use a box here to create a div that's going to be a flex box that's going to arrange all of its children. So right here, and those children will be cards, by the way. So right here, I will create a new box component with an opening and closing tag, and I will use that SX prop to provide some styles right here. And this was simply arbitrary styles added by me as I was designing this. So this is just to show how you might apply some of these common CSS effects to something like a box here. So I added here display of flex to make it a flex box. I said flex direction is going to be row. I believe that is the default order of a flexbox and its children, but I like to always make it explicit as well. Then I'm going to add the flex wrap property set to wrap to make sure my children do not end up stacked up on one line, but actually wrap onto multiple separate lines if all the cards cannot fit onto a single line. Then I'm going to add some padding, and I'm going to put 32 pixels and 64 pixels. What that is going to do is add 32 pixels of padding on top and bottom, and 64 pixels of padding on left and right. And then finally, there's actually a flex-related property called gap, which is going to be the gap or space between subsequent flex children. And I'm going to set this to be 16 pixels. So that means between every two cards, there's going to be a margin or a gap of 16 pixels. And that is going to apply both vertically and horizontally between different cards. And we'll see this in just a moment. So within a box, I'm going to render a sample card like so with an opening and closing tag. And I will once again use the SX prop to provide some styles. Here, I'm going to use a width, and I'm going to set the card's width to 300 pixels. And right now, the card doesn't have anything within it. And so for that, we're going to provide our card header and card content components as children of this card. So right here, I'm just going to render card header, self-closing, and card content I'm going to make with both an opening and a closing tag, okay? And then we're, as always, going to add some content in between the tags or as props, and that's what's going to affect our actual design. So for the card header, there is a prop available called avatar, and that is where we can provide something like the user's avatar. What I'm going to do is provide a prop here, and that value is going to be its own instantiated avatar component. So I'm just going to write avatar, which was a component we imported at the very top, and provide an opening and closing component tag. And in between here, rather than doing a user image, I'm instead going to do the user initials. So our first employee is going to have a name of Michael Scott. So his initials will be MS. And these are all just arbitrary examples of something I could build with these components. There's no like specific rhyme or reason or business value to do the initials here. It's just my own personal choice for this project. So there's our avatar, and you can see that nice little circular logo appear on the top left of the card. And then there is another prop called title that I can provide. And to title, I can provide a string, and that is going to be the title of the header. So now when I add Michael Scott, you can see it appears very elegantly to the right of that avatar, which is our initials. All right, so that is our header. That is kind of the top section of this card. Then within our card content right here, we can provide the actual content of the card. So here I can do really whatever I want. What I'm going to do is use my typography component once again to add some text. And here I'm going to write the person's job title. So for Michael Scott, they are the regional manager. So save that. And that is what a sample card is going to look like for us. Employee name, employee initials, and employee title. Okay, so just to give us a couple more employees to work with, what I'm going to do is copy and paste the card that we currently have, and then create maybe a couple more sample employees, just fill in some sample data for them so we can see how it plays out on our user interface. So let me copy this card right here, and let me paste it below. And right here, we'll change these initials to be DS, and the title prop will be Dwight Schrute. And the title will be assistant to the regional manager. Save that, and there is our second card. Let me add another one below right here. This is going to be a title of Jim Halpert, which means our initials are going to be JH, and his title is going to be salesman. I'm going to put that right here, and we should hopefully start to see these cards break up onto different lines, and indeed they do. There we go. Let's add two more. So right here, another card. I'm going to do a title prop value of Pam Beasley with initials PB, and her title is Front Desk Secretary. Save that. And then one more time with our card, we're going to have one more option. This is going to be a title of Stanley Hudson for the name with SH for the initials, and his title is similarly going to be salesman. So right here, salesman, let Prettier do its job, and there we go. So now we have 5 sample cards. It's a good place to start with to practice our filter logic. But right now, all of our cards are being rendered in line with the data written directly within the JSX. In the very next lesson, we're going to transition this employee information to be a part of component state and see how we can render a card for every single employee that we have. And that will allow us to transition into the next section where we are eventually going to get this employee data not from inline text or from declared data in our JavaScript, but from an actual endpoint, from a mock backend that we're going to make an API request to fetch. So we're kind of starting out with the most classic way, right? In traditional HTML, we would just write all this inline, and we're going to transition to basically a modern front-end architecture where we define the UI on the front end, but then make a request to get the data that will populate the UI from the backend. And you're going to see how this all works step by step as we continue. So I will see you in the next lesson.